Hello, welcome to Rye Brook Focus. My name is John Mugno, and I'll be your host today. My guest today on Rye Brook Focus is David Thomas, who is the president of the Friends of the African American Cemetery, which is located mainly in the town of Rye, adjacent to the Greenwood Union Cemetery. Dave became aware of the cemetery's existence in 2010 and formed the Friends Group in 2015. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for his work with the cemetery, I wanted to mention to everyone, Dave was awarded in 2022 the Westchester County Historical Society's highest honor, the Cy Shulman History Award, for his work in preserving both the headstones and the narratives of those interred at the historic African American Cemetery. Congratulations, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you.
I note that the award mentions not only the physical space, but also the narratives of those known to be interred there, which I think is actually equally important as having identified the space in which people were buried. So, Dave, perhaps we should start with the history of the cemetery's creation in 1860. The donors, I understand, were the Halsteads, who resided in the town of Rye. Can you tell us a little about them?
As you know, that should be a subject for the Rye Historical Society, but I do know a few facts about them. They lived over on, what's that road going out to the sea? That slips my mind.
Yeah.
Milton, yes, thank you.
Right.
They lived over there, right across where there's a deli over there, very good deli. And there's a stone wall, which is actually, I believe, one of the remaining remnants of their property. And they were Quakers, and they deeded the land to the town of Rye for the express use of burying African Americans. Now, in the 1860s, this was something that was not too popular, but for religious reasons, you know, that was a great, that amount of conviction on their part was really surprising. And that's where this comes from.
Good.
They were, I'm sorry, they were fairly wealthy, and they did actually have a part of their, and I found this out much later, part of their furnishings were actually shown in an exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I believe they still have some of those artifacts there.
Oh, interesting. Do you know why they selected this land? Did they already own it, or did they buy it to donate it?
We believe they owned the land. And if you go back on maps, it really doesn't say, but a lot of that property, now think of where Milton Road is, and then where the Osborne is, and then where the J Center is. Now, that's a pretty far stretch from where their estate was. So I tend to believe that this was sort of part of the land that they owned, or maybe a tenant. They had a tenant on the land, because it was on the other side of the railroad track.
Right.
That railroad track, of course, you know now, is the New Haven line. But so we're not sure that it was contiguous with their estate, but you know, that was the land that they deeded. So everything's a little bit murky now. We just recently found out that land, the land between the cemetery and Greenwood Union, there's a small road there and like a swamp. That's actually owned by the Osborne.
Ah.
And we found this out, and once we approached them, they were very excited and have been very helpful in maintaining that piece of property, that road that leads to the cemetery. And they sent volunteers over to help clean it, and we're entering into a new phase and a new partnership with them to keep that road open and well maintained so that the site is accessible.
Good. I did a little research on the topic, and some there was a mention to perhaps there had already been on this land prior to their donation African American burials. Do we have any idea if that's true or not? Have they
There have
already
been,
been? Go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, no, sorry. Go ahead.
We believe that is true. There have been rumors, and through my research, although I can find no written documentation for this,
Hmm.
that there were African American burials on that land. Now, this is all conjecture, it's all rumor, we're not sure. And that was one of the reasons why I've been trying to raise funds, myself in the town of Rye. I've been trying to raise funds for ground penetrating radar to discover where all of the interments are. Now, this may not lead us to, whether that fact is true, but it'll give us a count. And
Hmm.
so we have 381 confirmed burials. Now, if we go over that number, then that leads to the possibility that there may have been burials prior to that. But knowing and I don't want to, I get very passionate about it. I have a lot of information, I have a lot of thoughts. Considering the way African Americans were buried prior to the 1800s, now, if they were enslaved African Americans, there would be no coffin because most of the burials, as we know from the Wall Street site, were just cloth wrappings. So a lot of the evidence might have been deteriorated because of the swampy nature of the land. It is between the swamp and the stream. So we're not 100% sure. So these are things that, we're hoping to find out in the future.
Hmm. Is there a program to raise funds for the radar?
Well, we are. I've been trying to do it. Unfortunately, I have a day job which takes up the majority of my time. But the
Right.
town of Rye is Gary Zuckerman, the current town supervisor, and his staff are hot on the trail of funding. So, I'm not sure and where they are at the stage, but I believe Gary's that kind of person. He will get it done, and he will find the funds.
Right. Now, you mentioned there were 381 confirmed burials on the site. How many of those people have been identified?
Well, we have all of their names. Those are the names
Ah,
we have. But
okay.
there are only about 80 headstones at the site. So that leaves quite a few people or quite a few burial spots that are not marked, or we haven't found the headstone. And that's the thing. A lot of times, people didn't have the money to create this elaborate headstones. If you've been to the site, you'll notice we have some really grand monuments that are over 6 feet high and marble and
Right.
granite. And then we have concrete crosses that were obviously made, with just a mold and concrete and no name on it whatsoever. So we have this multiplicity of headstones there. So some of them might have been flat to the ground and have been covered over many years. So, and that's the other reason for the ground penetrating radar. Hopefully we can find some markers that are buried.
Right. That was an interesting point you made about the crosses. Is it that the names have been eroded with time, or were there not names put on the crosses?
Um, I believe there were names because in some of those concrete crosses, there are slots. And
Right.
it's a place where someone would put a piece of wood uh, or something of that nature. And one of the headstones there is a very unique headstone. It's decorated with small white stones. It's a concrete cross decorated with small white stones. And the nameplate on the monument is a metal nameplate. And I know that
Hmm.
during a funeral, if you look at old funeral records, there is a nameplate added into the charges. So I believe this nameplate was removed from the coffin prior to the burial and then placed on the headstone.
Ah.
So, and that, luckily I have some photos of the nameplate, but that is slowly being worn away, and we're looking at ways to preserve that. So,
Oh, okay. This is
nice.
really quite the detective story you're involved with.
It really is. I mean, as time goes on, you just want to know, hey, how did it become like this? And, you know,
Right.
it wouldn't have happened without people coming to the site and giving me these hints and clues.
And the people who gave you the hints and clues were basically people who knew or thought they had relatives buried there, I understand.
Some of them, yes, but a lot of them were just people who are interested and came by the site. We have two celebrations each year,
Right.
one on Memorial Day and one on Veterans Day. Well, on a in or around those days. I don't like to put them on the actual holidays because we give people a chance to have a free day where they can come by. But that's when people come by, and they always have a story to tell or information to present to us.
Okay. And who were some of the notable people who were buried in the cemetery?
Well, there are, and it's funny, I think of them as all notable
No,
because,
that's right.
and their names are not known, but their stories make them notable. Um, we have, of course, uh, Samuel Bell, who was a member of the 54th Massachusetts, made famous in the movie Glory. We have Charles A. Francis, who was a member of the 369th World War I Harlem Hellfighters. And then we have, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. I don't have it. We have sailors and soldiers from the Civil War. We have one soldier, and this is notable by its absence, a soldier whose name is Mike Pace, Paice. He's the only Spanish-American War veteran buried at the site. And he was a member of the Buffalo Soldiers Regiment, the 10th Cavalry. And they famously joined Teddy Roosevelt in his attack on San Juan Hill. We haven't been able to, we know he was a member of that regiment, but we have no real records on it. They didn't keep records for the African Americans in the 10th. And hopefully, I can reach out and somewhere, there are records that say what he did and can confirm, where he was at the time. Then there's a really touching story of Ida Greaves, who was a nurse from Barbados. And during the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918, she actually came to the town of Rye to offer assistance as a trained nurse. And we have the records of her arriving, the boat she arrived on, and her records of being a passenger on that boat. And then we have a record of her death from Spanish flu. So she came here to help. And the sad thing about it was that on the records of her passage, they have her listed as a domestic when she was a trained nurse. And we know she was a trained nurse because in Barbados at that time, there was a school for nurses and midwives that was actually funded by one of the founders of the Kellogg breakfast family cereal. Their family actually had one of its members who funded this church or this school in Barbados that trained nurses for their local for local healthcare, because Barbados was a small island and it didn't have all of the accoutrement medical knowledge that we had here. But she came here, and we have no idea why she took this trip. And then have helped out, assisted, been this great first responder, and then to have died and be buried in an unmarked grave in a foreign land. So, and when I learned about this story, I actually did a video that's on our Facebook page, and I'll give you a lot more information on what that was. And but it's such a touching story that I had to tell it, and I'm hopefully, once I get in touch with the Barbadians, maybe they'll have some more information on it.
Yeah, that's that's quite interesting. Did she? Do you know when she arrived here? So she arrived just about after the flu had broken out, and then
I
she died
believe,
because of the
yeah,
flu.
I believe it was 1917 when she arrived, and then she passed away sometime. Um, I believe it was in the winter of 1918.
Okay,
And,
so
I do have some of the records on that. So,
good.
but the story is the main thing.
The other story which I've read about on your other programs is a family, and I think it's New Rochelle, and the patriarch came as an escaped slave from the South. They formed a church, and could you maybe tell us a little something about them?
Yes, Robert Purdy. Now, this is a great story because Robert Purdy's descendants are current members of the Friends, and
Ah,
it's a heartwarming story. He was an escaped slave from Mississippi who found his way to Scarsdale. The Purdy's own property in Scarsdale, New York, and it's well documented. And they were one of the founding members of the Barry Avenue Church here in the town of Rye and over on in Mamaroneck. So he came here, and then they took a horse-drawn carriage from Scarsdale to come all the way over here to hold services at the Barry Avenue Church. And his descendant is, well, there are two of them. One is Robinette Robinson, the other is Carol Ubosi. And both of these wonderful ladies are active members of the Friends. They always come out, and although there's some dispute as to whether they're actually related, we believe they are, because it seems that a lot of the people interred at the site happen to be related, because that African-American community was tight-knit. So here we are, and Robinette has had records of her family since the 1900s, and then Carol Ubosi has records of her family during the 1800s. So we have this sort of combination of all this information. Now, Carol also has artifacts from the 1800s of her family. They had kept their family owned a hardware store or what they would call a dry goods store in Mamaroneck during the 1800s, and she has all the records and some of the actual products that they sold in the store. And she is in the process of cataloging many thousands of letters and other artifacts that were preserved in a basement. And the amazing part is that the basement was at a perfect temperature to preserve these documents and these artifacts. And even some items of clothing were saved. And we've had them on display at the J Center over the years, and she still has them. So that was a treasure trove of information about African-American life in the town of Rye.
oh. And did she, how was it discovered that she had all this, or was she trying to make it known to people she had it?
Well, it was funny, they had moved, her mother actually had a house in Mamaroneck. And when her mother passed away, they found these trunks in the basement. So, she knew about her family history, her mother and her father, always spoke about it. But here was the proof, and she had records of organizations they belonged to, and the taxes that they paid, and the pension he received from service in the Civil War, and photos, and photos of people that are not related to them. So it's really a mind-blowing trove of this information that she has, and she's still trying to identify it.
Interesting. When you start looking, what you can find about things that were
just
not well documented, shall we say?
Yeah, and you know, her family's an anomaly, unfortunately, and I'm not sure, you know, for African Americans, discovering their history is a difficult thing because of segregation, because of racism, because of our own perception of who we are. A lot of times, our history is hidden from us because our parents and our grandparents are not comfortable with sharing it because of the stigma. Like if one person got into trouble, they would just shut it out. They would not talk about it, and you would never know about them. And it's the same thing in my family. Even though I you know, we recently discovered, not recently, about 30 years ago, that my father received a medal from the French government while he was serving in World War II. Now, we only received that information in the late 80s. He had passed away in the early 80s, and my mother had actually petitioned the French government to send us the record. So I always wondered why my father never spoke about it, because he wasn't that kind of person, or African Americans didn't do that. So it's a strange relationship with our own history.
Interesting. Let me take you back to when you founded the group, in the Friends rather, in 2015. What did you think then were your priorities in that?
Well, my priority was to just let people know what was there. And, you know, I have my own family history, which I'm extremely proud of, and trying to pass along to my children and the children of my relatives. So when I found this place, I was amazed, number one, to find out that here in the North, we had these segregated cemeteries. I've lived in Mount Vernon all my life. I was born there. We don't have a segregated cemetery in Mount Vernon. Even St. Paul's church is not really segregated. I mean, as far as I know, that's just one big cemetery. It's a historic place, but we don't have those. Now, whether they were there, we don't know, because we just don't know. But then to find out in this very affluent town of Rye, city of Rye, there was this African-American cemetery. And then I find out there was a major African-American community within Mamaroneck and the town of Rye and Portchester. So it was all a surprise to me. And when I went there and saw it, something just clicked. I mean, it's kind of strange. I just figured, hey, this is really something special here. We have all of these veterans, we have all of these families, we have all of it. We have some reverends, and who knows what else is there. You know, these are all people that we should be proud of, and that contributed to life in the town of Rye.
Right.
So that was my main goal. And to do that, I wanted to bring people to the site. So I used the Veterans and Memorial Day to bring politicians and people to the site and to see what else is there.
See, I've seen the photos of the various events you've held on Memorial Day or Veterans Day, and you've been successful in bringing local politicians to the site.
Well, it's you know, a lot of them I know. So I worked as a consultant for the town of Rye, and I worked for the village of Portchester. So these were people I actually knew, and a lot of them are friends. Joe Carvin, who was the former supervisor of town of Rye, is a friend of mine, and he was the one who we started this journey together. And he knew that we owned the cemetery, but once I found out and I asked him about it, he said, "You know what, Dave, if you feel strongly about this, we'll give you all the help I can." And the current administration under Gary Zuckerman has done the same thing.
Oh, good.
We have done some great things. As a partner, the town of Rye has been a godsend, and they have promoted the cemetery and maintained it, and are currently, doing their best to further, the outreach for the cemetery.
Now, you had said, and you've touched on it in some of your remarks already, but just to be clearer about this, what you indicated that your work on the cemetery changed your thinking about history. What did you mean by that?
And this is American history, and this is the new American history, because it involves all of us, not just white America. It includes indigenous people, it includes enslaved people, it includes freed African Americans, it includes Asians, Indo-Europeans, whoever, anyone who came to the town of Rye at that time, or during the past 400 and some years of the town, are part of this history. Now, when I went to school 1,000 years ago, this was not in any course. And that was one of the things that really changed my idea. And for African Americans who grew up in the 70s, the whole Black history thing was something that was enlightening to us. We knew we were here, but we didn't know how we affected American life.
Right.
And now we're looking for those stories, because the more we find out about ourselves and our history, the more we can fill in those gaps about America. And if you only know one side of history, then you really don't know history at all. So that's how it changed me.
Have you been able to incorporate, or have the school districts locally been able to incorporate any of your findings into their American history or New York State history courses?
Unfortunately, no. And that's really the shame. I've reached out to the school systems to join us on those days. And there have been a few people who've come out. Members of the school board of Portchester have come out, and members of the school board of Rye have come out. But there really hasn't been that connection with the local history curriculum that I know is being taught. I believe it's 4th and 5th grade when that is taught. So it's really a shame, because I mean, we live in Westchester County, which was here at the birth of this nation and before.
Right.
There were people here in the 1600s, as you know, as we all well know. But are there trips to these locations? Or do we know about those people who secured our freedom, that fought in the revolution? And one of the things I learned recently, a pivotal point in the capture of Major Andre and the whole deal with Benedict Arnold, those were Westchester residents who started the process of forcing Major Andre to cross the river and come down the post road and eventually be captured. So if this didn't happen, if these two people, and one of them was Rifleman Jack Peterson, if he had not fired on that ship and sent that ship going back away from West Point, the spot where he was supposed to pick up Andre, those secrets to West Point would have been passed to the British, and that would have changed the course of the Revolutionary War. So how many more stories are like that that we don't know about, that have been hidden from us? Now, they could have just been lost in the haze of history, or they could have been purposely deleted or misplaced. So that's what the search is. That is what I'm looking for, and that's what every historian should be looking for.
Yeah, I mean, because you make a good point, because Westchester during the Revolution was an area in which the British Army came up, the American Army was here, American Army retreats toward White Plains. There's plenty of things, military actions going on in Westchester during the Revolutionary War. And you're right, the details of all that is probably still to be revealed.
Oh yeah, and not only that, all throughout history, Westchester's played a part. A lot of the famous African Americans who were part of the Harlem Renaissance and music and culture in the 1920s and 30s, they lived in Westchester. They worked in New York City, but they moved to Westchester.
Right.
And a lot of them are buried up here during the 60s. Malcolm X is buried in Westchester.
Hmm.
Thelonious Monk is buried in Westchester. You know, these are people who are part of our culture, who shaped American history. And,
Right.
you know, that sort of things, even just there's something to a student visiting the site of where history happened that is special. And also seeing the grave of someone who was a part of history. It's something that happens to a student that connects them to the subject matter. And I believe that sparks excitement and real involvement and passion for learning more. So that's what I would love to see.
Right. Now, I understand several local groups, including the Portchester NAACP, the town of Rye, the Boy Scouts, and then there was another group of, I think, stonemasons who, under a memorial fund, who came and helped, who made important contributions to cleaning up the site and making it more accessible to people. And I know you mentioned the ground searching radar that you're looking for, but is there a longer list of things that could be done? And here where I'm going, and it ties back to what we were talking about, the schools, some of the things you've done require a lot of effort in the research. And maybe there's a role to play for, say, seniors in high school who are doing AP American history, or people in college who are looking to be historians, American history people. And this is a type of topic that gives rise to original research, which is an important skill that they should be acquiring.
Yeah, you would think so. And I've been in touch with local colleges about the cemeteries. I've spoken at at places and spoken to people who are academics, and I believe that's still ongoing, and I have high hopes for this in the future, and I'm sure we'll get it done. But speaking about, and it was the World Monument Fund who actually helped us with this, which is an amazing thing, and it's all due to one person, and that is Suzanne Cleary from the J Heritage Center. She made that contact. They had a program where they had internships and mentoring for at-risk youth at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, a world famous cemetery. And they were apprenticing as stonemasons and historic preservationists. And they came up to the African American Cemetery in Rye, and over 3 days straightened and repaired 99% of the stones at that site. some were leaning, some were broken, some were not on their pedestals, some were crooked, and they came up and they repaired all of them. There's one that I wouldn't let them touch because it's just too damaged. And that's one of the things I would love to get done this year, is to have someone, an expert come in and repair this. I wouldn't ask them because, that was not part of their program. But I still have contact with them, and I reach out to them when there are issues and with the headstones that I'm not an expert in. I'm certainly not an expert in, but they give me hints and help us out. But that's something that really turned out to be a godsend. And the Boy Scouts, it's just unbelievable. Mostly it's Troop 400 in Portchester, the Portchester branches, but there are other troops that have Eagle projects that have been done at the site, and they have been tremendous help in cleaning the headstones, research, just bettering the site as we go along. If it's weird, if you've been to the site in 2010 when I first started, you go there now, if you haven't been and seen everything in between, you'd be amazed at what we've accomplished over those years.
Yeah, speaking for myself, I didn't even know it existed until I was reading newspaper articles about you and some of the ceremonies you've held and things like that on Veterans Day and Memorial Day. So then I went and looked, and you're right, it's still a little difficult to find, I have to say.
Yes.
But it looks like it's in pretty good shape as a piece of land now.
Oh, when I've seen pictures from the 70s. There was 4 feet of weeds across that entire site, and stones were broken, tipped over, garbage everywhere. And that's where the town of Rye really came in, because the town of Rye actually owns the site. So of the 2 places in the city of Rye that belong to the town of Rye, one of which is Rye Beach, and the other which is the African American Cemetery. So they maintain both. And like I said, when I first got there, I was lucky to be a consultant for the town. And, we just got to work, and the supervisor said, hey, we're going to treat the African American Cemetery like we own it. And we do, just like Rye Beach, which is in fantastic shape and a beautiful place. And so now the African American Cemetery is too.
Good. Now, I guess to a little wrap up a little bit, my intention is to contact the high school's history department and let them know that we did this recording. And I wonder if in the end, at the end of our conversation here, if there's some message you would have to students who are interested in helping you uncover some of this history. Are there projects, research projects that a high school student could do? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the easiest thing to do would be, number one, to review the names of the confirmed burial list. Now, the reason why I said this, at one event, I basically asked people to go to the burial list and scan the burial list and pick out one name.
Right.
And then do research on that one name. And a very weird thing happened. A young lady, I can't place her name right now, came up to me at the cemetery and said, I picked the name from the burial list. And I found out that this person lived in a house on the block where I currently live.
Huh.
And that's, I could go tell you probably 40 stories from the cemetery of things that happened like that. People just sent me emails. I know of a Black family that lived in the swamps near they had a small house in the swamps near where the Osborne is. And they used to sell fish and produce from this swamp during the fall and summer. Or I was there was a young man I went to school with, and he drowned in the pond by uh, the new houses in Rye Brook behind the Rye Ridge Mall. There's a pond there. He drowned there, and he's buried at the site. So all of these things pop up,
Right.
and people just say, "Hey, I knew this, I knew that," and it all these stories just sort of meld together, and we find out that we have all these memories and things that need to be put together, and it is a detective story, but there's no criminal at the end. It's just knowledge that's at the end.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dave. This is really kind of interesting because one of the themes we've had a little bit through our Rye Brook focus programs is the importance of people who take on important tasks as volunteers because they see it's something that needs to be done. And I think that really is a reasonable description of your situation. You saw a task, it needed to be done, and you've taken it on. So thank you very much for being on the program. And we'll get back to you, hopefully, with some contacts at the high school. Thank you very much, Dave.